They said my dreams were selfish, that helping them was the right thing to do. But when I finally stopped helping, I learned what real love and freedom actually mean. I used to believe that love meant giving everything up without complaint, that being a good son meant always saying yes, even when everything inside me screamed no. That belief did not come from books or movies. It came from my parents, from years of small conversations and heavy silences, from my mom's tired smile when she said, "You'll have time for your dreams later. Right now, we need you." And from my dad, who never really asked, just expected. So I stayed. When my friends talked about college tours and road trips and internships in far-off cities, I was sweeping the back room of my father's auto parts shop. When they posted pictures from beaches and campuses, I was unclogging the drain in our kitchen sink while Mom nursed a migraine in the living room. I told myself I was being useful, that one day it would pay off, that if I kept showing up, kept helping out, kept shelving my dreams like old photo albums, eventually I would get my turn. And at first, it felt good. There was pride in being needed. I got used to being the one they could count on, the steady one, the fixer. My younger sister, Ava, got to chase her art dreams in Chicago. My older brother, Mark, bounced between cities trying out startups and burning through rent money like it was Monopoly cash. Meanwhile, I stayed in Iowa, in the same zip code, working 2 jobs, covering bills when Mark forgot, and Ava's gallery sales came up short. Nobody asked me if I wanted more. They just assumed I would make it work. And I did, because that is what I thought love looked like. My 20s passed in a blur of late nights and obligations. I missed weddings. I turned down job offers that would have taken me out of state. I told myself this was what family did, that one day they would see, that someday they would look at me and say, "We could not have done it without you." But that day never came. The irony? They call me the lucky one. "You're so grounded," Mom would say. "So mature, always thinking about others." Like being the emotional mule of the family was something to be proud of. I nodded along, smiled through gritted teeth, told myself this was my role. Until one afternoon, something shifted. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it cracked something wide open in me, and I never saw it coming. The funny thing about losing yourself is that it does not happen all at once. It happens in inches. You give up one thing, then another. And before you realize it, the person you thought you were becomes a shadow, someone you only recognize in flashes when you catch your reflection in a window you did not mean to look into. For me, it started with the job I wanted after high school. A photography internship 2 towns over, unpaid but promising. I remember the application sitting on the kitchen table, half filled out. Mom walked in, saw it, and said, "That sounds like a nice hobby, but what we really need right now is someone to help out at the shop. Just for a little while. Just for a little while." That phrase became the anthem of my 20s. One summer turned into 2 years. The camera stayed in the closet. I told myself there would be other chances, but they kept coming. The "we need you" moments. Ava needed a car to get to campus, so I gave her mine and biked to work. Dad needed back surgery, so I picked up extra shifts to keep the business running. Mom needed help with the bills, so I delayed moving out another year. Then another. Every time, it was supposed to be temporary. But temporary became permanent. And my dreams, well, they just stopped feeling real after a while. The photos I used to take, they stopped too. My old Nikon collected dust in the closet like a relic of a life that belonged to someone else. I started telling people I never really wanted to leave town. That small town life suited me. That I liked the routine. It was easier than explaining the truth. That every day I stayed, a part of me slipped away. Even when I started working as an assistant manager at the local grocery store, something I never wanted to do, it felt easier than chasing anything uncertain. My boss, Mitch, was the kind of guy who wore the same tie every day and thought ambition was a dirty word. He liked me because I showed up on time and never asked for more. That was my whole life. Show up. Do what is needed. Stay small. There was a girl once, Natalie. She worked in produce, always humming songs under her breath, always asking why I never talked about my plans. She told me once, "You've got this energy like you're meant to be somewhere else, but you won't let yourself leave." I told her she was wrong. She was not. We dated for a year. She left for Austin with a design job and a new haircut. I helped load the U-Haul. By 32, I had settled into a rhythm that looked like stability from the outside, but inside, it was hollow. I knew every creak in the house I grew up in, every crack in the sidewalk, every single thing that was never going to change. And I had stopped wondering what else could have been, until a letter came in the mail. An envelope. No return address. But inside was something that would change everything. It came on a Thursday. Plain white envelope. No return address. My name printed in careful handwriting I did not recognize. I almost threw it out, thought it was another real estate flyer, or maybe something from a church trying to recruit. But something made me open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick and cream-colored. Fancy, like the kind you see at weddings. I unfolded it slowly. The words were short, neat, and typed in black ink. A formal tone, but the message was personal. We are pleased to invite you to apply for the fall residency at Ridgeway Arts Center. Your photography work was submitted for consideration by an anonymous supporter who believes in your talent. Selected candidates will receive a 3-month paid residency, full housing, and access to studio equipment. Applications close in 2 weeks. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at that letter like it might catch fire and disappear before I could process it. Photography. Me. After all these years. I had not taken a serious photo since I was 23. But someone thought I was still worth something. Enough to send my name in. Enough to give me a shot. For the first time in forever, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not sadness. Not anger. Hope. That scared me more than anything. I tucked the letter back in the envelope and shoved it into the junk drawer. That is where I kept things I did not know how to deal with. Bills, spare keys, old receipts. It felt safer there. Like maybe if I ignored it, the choice would disappear on its own. But it did not. For the next 3 days, I thought about it constantly. At work. In bed. While fixing the leaky faucet Mom kept reminding me about. I could feel the old part of me stirring. The kid who used to spend hours lying in the grass, pointing a camera at the sky, trying to catch birds in motion. The guy who used to believe in images that told stories. But then came the familiar voice in my head. You cannot leave. Who will help Dad with the shop? What about Mom's appointments? What about Ava's rent? That voice had always won. Until something else arrived. It was Sunday morning. I was cleaning out the attic when I found it. An old cardboard box labeled Jack, College. Written in my handwriting, all caps, from years ago. Inside was my camera, still wrapped in a towel. The Nikon, along with a stack of prints I had forgotten even existed. Photos of lakes, street corners, a girl laughing by a payphone, light falling across an empty diner booth. Little pieces of the world I had once tried to capture. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, dust floating in the sunbeam above me. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had buried long ago. What if I said yes? Once the question was in my head, it would not leave. What if I said yes? I carried it with me like a stone in my pocket. I heard it whispering while I stocked shelves at the grocery store, while I watched Dad count receipts at the shop, while I sat across from Mom as she rubbed her temples and asked if I could drive her to her next appointment. The idea kept pressing against my chest, tighter and tighter. I had spent so long saying no to everything that might have taken me somewhere new. And each time, I convinced myself it was noble, that putting family first meant I was doing the right thing. But lately, that righteousness felt more like an excuse. When I finally pulled the letter back out of the drawer, I noticed something I had missed before. In small print at the bottom, it read, "The Ridgeway Residency is open to creators at any stage. All we ask is that you be honest about what you want." That last line hit me hard. What did I want? No one had asked me that in years. Not even myself. I stayed up late that night, pacing the kitchen in the dark. I thought about what it would take to apply. Just a short portfolio, an essay, and a statement of intent. I could probably do it in a weekend. And then the old guilt crept in like clockwork. Dad had been talking about finally expanding the shop, taking on more inventory. Mom was waiting on the results of her last checkup, and I was the only one who knew how to deal with the insurance calls. Ava had just messaged me about needing help with rent again. If I left, things would fall apart. Wouldn't they? That night, I pulled out the camera and loaded it with the last roll of film I had. I walked around town at 2 in the morning, shooting whatever caught my eye. The flicker of a neon sign in a foggy window, an empty streetlight leaning at an angle, the cracked paint on the old courthouse steps. It felt right, like breathing again. The next morning, I sat down at my laptop. I opened a blank document. I typed the words. My name is Jack Rivers. I used to take photographs. Then I stopped. But I am ready to remember what it felt like to see again. I wrote the whole thing in one sitting. No edits. No filters. Just the truth. When I clicked submit, my hands were shaking. I stared at the confirmation screen like it might disappear. Then I closed the laptop, walked into the living room, and found my parents sitting side by side on the couch. They looked up when I entered. Mom had a blanket around her shoulders. Dad was holding a mug with chipped glaze. The same one I bought him years ago. I stood there for a second, then said it. I applied to a residency. It's in Colorado. 3 months. If I get in, I'm going. Silence. Long and heavy. Dad blinked like I had spoken in another language. Mom opened her mouth, but said nothing. That old panic started bubbling up, but I pushed it down. This was not a request. This time, I was not asking for permission. They did not yell. That almost made it worse. Dad sat there, swirling the coffee in his mug like he was watching a storm roll in through the window. Mom just stared at the TV, even though it was off. I waited, heart thudding. Finally, she said, "But who's going to help your father?" I had known that would be her first question. Not what is the residency. Not are you excited? Just straight to logistics. Straight to guilt. I do not know, I said. Maybe Mark can step in. Maybe Ava. Dad grunted. Not quite an answer. More like disapproval wrapped in a breath. Mom looked at me with that tired disappointment I had seen since I was a teenager. This is not the time to be selfish, Jack. There it was. Selfish. It hit harder than I expected. After all these years of being anything but selfish, all it took was one decision, for myself, for that word to be thrown at me like it was truth. But I did not apologize. Not this time. Instead, I said, maybe it is finally time to be. That ended the conversation. They did not speak to me for the rest of the day. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling fan. It spun like time itself, fast, repetitive, and going nowhere. I kept thinking about that sentence in the letter, be honest about what you want. I wanted to feel alive again. A week passed. No update from Ridgeway. The silence from my parents lingered. We moved around each other like strangers in our own house. I almost convinced myself I had made it up, that the letter had been some elaborate prank, that nothing was going to come of it. Then, on Friday afternoon, I got the email. Subject, congratulations, Ridgeway Fall Residency. I opened it and just stared. I had been chosen. They wanted me. I read the email 5 times before I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding since I was 21. 3 months in Colorado. Private studio. Travel stipend. A place to live. I sat back in the chair, the weight of it all sinking in. It was happening. Really happening. And then came the second wave, the dread of telling them. When I told Dad, he did not even look up from the receipt book. When do you leave? He asked, voice flat. 2 weeks, I said. He nodded once. That was it. Later that night, I caught him in the garage. Thought maybe we would finally talk. Instead, he handed me a box of tools and said, take these, just in case you need to fix something out there. I took them, but I could not help noticing he never said good luck. And Mom, she just pressed a container of frozen lasagna into my hands and said, there's no microwave in the mountains. But the look in her eyes? That was something else entirely. Packing was quick. I did not have much. A couple of bags, my camera, some old prints, and that box of tools Dad gave me. Though I still was not sure if it was a gesture of care or control. I told Ava I was leaving. She said she was happy for me, but it sounded like someone reading from a script. Then she added, so, does that mean you can't cover my phone bill next month? I just said, that's right. She did not respond after that. The morning I left, the house was quiet. No hugs. No send-off. Dad was out early. Mom lingered by the fridge, wiping down a perfectly clean counter. I said goodbye anyway. I looked at her and said, I'll call when I get there. She nodded. Her eyes flicked to mine for half a second, but they were already wet. Still, no one asked me to stay. The drive to Colorado was long and strange. Like I was slipping out of an old version of myself and into something new, but I did not quite know what that would be yet. When I arrived at Ridgeway, the sky was a color I had not seen in years. The kind that makes you pull over just to stare. The air was thinner, sharper. And the town? It looked like a movie set. Old brick buildings, winding streets, cafes where people actually sat and talked. They gave me a small apartment above the studio. Nothing fancy, but it felt mine. The studio had high windows and a door that stuck a little when it opened. The floors creaked. The smell of wood and dust and paint lingered in the air. It was perfect. The first few days I wandered, camera in hand, but I did not shoot anything. I was trying to remember how to see. Then one night, I was walking near a lake just as the fog rolled in. Something about the way the light from the docks hit the water made me stop. I raised the camera, focused, and clicked. And just like that, it came back. The instinct, the curiosity, the joy. It was not about making something beautiful. It was about noticing again. Noticing the world, the moment, myself. Every day after that, I shot more. Old signs, bent fences, the way frost clung to mailboxes in the early morning. I started printing again, filling the studio walls with pieces of a life I thought I had lost. Other residents would wander in and out. Painters, sculptors, a poet from Oregon who had eyes like she had seen too much. We shared meals, talked about process, about what we gave up and what we still hoped to find. One night, sitting around a fire outside the studio, someone asked, "What are you trying to say with your work?" I did not answer right away, but then it hit me. I said, "I'm trying to prove I was here, that I mattered, even if it took me a while to believe it." Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned it. They just nodded. That was the moment I knew. I had finally chosen me. The calls started 2 weeks in. Missed calls first. Then a voicemail from Mom that said, "Just checking in. Hope you're warm out there." She sounded stiff, like she was not sure what tone to take, like she was testing the line to see if it still worked. Then came a group message from Ava, something about Dad pulling his back again lifting engine parts. She ended it with, "Not that you'd care." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood I wasn't required to fix everything just to prove my worth. The truth was, things were shifting back home, but not in ways I had expected. Dad hired a part-time worker at the shop, someone younger, faster, with a degree in business. I heard through a cousin. Apparently, the guy was doing all right. Mom started carpooling to appointments with a neighbor. Ava got a job at a bookstore, part-time but steady. In the absence of me, life kept moving. That should have stung, but it didn't. If anything, it felt like confirmation. That all those years I stayed and sacrificed. Maybe I wasn't as indispensable as I thought. Maybe I had been holding up a wall that was never going to collapse, just because someone said it might. One afternoon, I got an email from Ridgeway's coordinator. She told me a magazine editor had seen my photos at the gallery preview. They wanted to feature a few of my prints in a spread about forgotten towns. She asked if I'd be open to it. I stared at that message for 10 straight minutes. It felt surreal, like someone had reached into a dream I barely let myself have and pulled it into reality. I said yes. Then I printed out the email, folded it neatly, and mailed it home. No note. Just that single page. 3 days later, I got a letter back from Mom. Her handwriting was slower than I remembered, but the words were careful. "We saw it. We're proud. Just surprised. You never told us you were this good." That line hit me like a punch to the ribs. You never told us. I wanted to scream. Wanted to shout, I did. I did tell you. You just never listened. But instead, I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal. Because I was learning something out there in the mountains, something that had taken me 35 years to understand. Sometimes people only hear you when you stop speaking. I did not expect them to come. But near the end of my second month at Ridgeway, they showed up. Mom called first, said they were thinking of taking a little drive, and asked if I would be around that weekend. I said sure, and left it at that. No excitement. No bitterness. Just space. They pulled into the Ridgeway parking lot just after noon on Saturday. Same old silver SUV. Dad stepped out stiffly, looking around like he was not sure if he was impressed or uncomfortable. Mom followed, holding a casserole dish covered in foil. That felt so on-brand, I almost laughed. I walked them up to the studio, opened the creaky door, let them see. The walls were lined with prints. My prints. Dozens of them. They took it in slowly. Images of cracked windows, rusted signs, a child's boot hanging from a fence post. My favorite one hung dead center. An old farmhouse in winter, caught in late afternoon light. Every board soaked in gold like it had been waiting to be seen. Mom's eyes darted across the photos. She paused in front of that farmhouse. "Is this around here?" I nodded. Couple miles down Route 12. No one's lived there in decades. She leaned in closer, squinting. "It looks alive." I just said, "That's the point." Dad stood in the corner with his arms crossed, silent, like he was waiting for someone to explain why this mattered. After a while, We sat on the old bench near the window. Mom handed me the casserole, still warm. I set it aside. She asked questions, soft ones. What the residency was like. What I had learned. If I was eating enough. I answered politely. Briefly. Eventually, she said it. We didn't know this part of you. I nodded. That's because you weren't looking. It landed hard. But I did not say it with anger. Just truth. Dad shifted in his seat. Cleared his throat. You really planning to do this full time? I shrugged. If I can. There's freelance work. Exhibit interest. A few magazines. He nodded slowly. Still cautious. But no longer dismissive. Then he stood. Walked over to the farmhouse photo again. He stared at it for a while. Then, with his back still to me, he said, Your grandfather built a house like that. Looked just like this. Up near Cedar Falls. Used to take me hunting behind the barn. It was the first personal thing I had heard him say in months. Then he added, You captured something. I waited for the but it never came. Just silence. Heavy. Honest. They left soon after. The casserole in the fridge. A strange sort of quiet between us. No longer resentment, but not yet understanding. As they drove off, I watched their car disappear down the winding road, past the trees and toward the highway. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to follow. After they left, something changed. Not out there, in me. For most of my life, I moved like I was tethered to them. Their approval, their needs, their moods. I built my choices around their comfort. Even when I tried to step out, some invisible thread yanked me back. But now, I had finally done it. Chosen myself. And the world had not fallen apart. The house was still standing. The shop was still open. Ava was still figuring things out. And me? I was more alive than I had ever been. Each day at Ridgeway felt like a second chance I did not know I needed. I woke up early, not out of duty, but desire. I explored the forgotten edges of nearby towns, searching for the small details everyone else missed. A cracked mirror in a barber shop. A church sign missing letters. A playground overgrown with weeds, still holding on to laughter. And with every photo I took, I reclaimed a part of myself I had buried. My work started gaining attention. A curator from Denver reached out after seeing my prints online. She asked if I was open to a solo exhibit. I said yes before she even finished her sentence. They wanted to title it The Still Things. I like that, because that is what I had become, still. Not stuck. Not silenced. Just centered. A month later, I got another letter. Handwritten again, but this time with a return address. From my father. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. Just a few lines. We went to your gallery. Brought Ava. She didn't say much, but I saw the way she looked at your work. I think she understands now. I think I do too. You were never the one who stayed because you had no dreams. You stayed because you loved us. We see that now. We're proud of you, Jack. Truly. It was signed Dad. Not love, Dad. Just Dad. But that was enough. I stared at that letter for a long time. Then I placed it beside my camera, like a reminder that even the deepest roots can shift if you let them. That night, I stood out by the lake. Camera slung around my neck. No destination. Just watching the stars blink open above the tree line. And for the first time, I did not feel guilt. I did not feel fear. I felt free. The residency ended on a Sunday morning. The kind that smelled like coffee and early autumn. I packed slow. Not because I was unsure, but because for once, I was not rushing toward someone else's need. I left behind a note on the studio wall. Just one line. I am not who I was when I got here. Thank you. The gallery exhibit launched 3 weeks later in Denver. Small but packed. My name printed on the wall in clean white letters. Jack Rivers, The Still Things. People walked through, pointing at prints I remembered taking in silence. Some nodded thoughtfully. One woman cried. A teenage boy asked if I taught lessons. And standing at the very back, near the exit, were my parents. Mom wore the scarf I got her 6 Christmases ago. The one she said was too nice to wear. Dad looked smaller in that space, his hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the frames. They said little. They did not need to, because something had shifted between us, and they knew it. I was no longer the dependable son who said yes without question. No longer the boy who stayed behind to fill the gaps they would not acknowledge. I had grown, not out of rebellion, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I nodded at them from across the room. They nodded back. No hugs, no speeches, just that quiet understanding between people who finally see each other clearly for the first time. Later that night, I walked out into the cold Denver air. My phone buzzed with messages. A writer from a travel journal wanted to interview me. Someone else asked if I would consider teaching a workshop in Oregon. And for the first time in my life, I said yes without checking if anyone else needed me first. My parents still call sometimes. Mostly small updates. Dad talks about the new guy at the shop like he is proud of him. Mom asks if the air up in the mountains is still as clean as she remembers. They are proud, I can tell. But uneasy too. Like they are still adjusting to this new version of me. And that is all right. Because I am no longer waiting for their permission. I built a life they never imagined for me. And while they watch from the sidelines, quiet, maybe even a little stunned, I keep moving. Not to spite them, not to impress them, but for me. Because I have learned that love does not mean making yourself small so others can feel big. Love means showing up for yourself, too.